And today, a Subplatter upgrade.
On the Vintage Vibe.
Okay, so today we're going to do an upgrade to our Debut Pro that we did a quick unboxing of in the past. We're actually going to do a aluminum subplatter upgrade. So to prepare the turntable, the first thing we're going to do is remove the leather platter cover and then secondary the platter. As simple as that. Okay, we've already done an unboxing of the aluminum subplatter that is meant to be compatible with all the Debut models. I've gone ahead and I've just kind of washed my hands to make sure that I'm not transferring any oils across to this. It's really nicely constructed, as you can kind of see here. It has quite a bit of heft to it. And the idea here is the plastic or resin subplatter that you see kind of right here. There's not a lot of weight to this, and the bearing would sit right underneath of this. When we put a aluminum type subplatter as such, we're putting a lot more weight on top of the bearing itself, and we should be reducing kind of any unwanted vibrations, or what sometimes we refer to as whoa and flutter. And we ultimately should probably get better pace out of the turntable, better speed control, and we should be able to extract some additional details from our records. Now, to remove the existing one, all we want to do is just simply remove the belt. And again, important to make sure you've washed your hands so you don't transfer any oils across. And then just simply lift up on the existing subplatter. And you can actually see up and close, really how flimsy this is in comparison to what we're going to replace it with. I mean, this really is a night and day difference. Okay, so what we discovered when we removed the subplatter here is a couple things. One, I don't think there is any oil whatsoever on this shaft or on the tip here, which is really the base of the shaft that sits on top of the bearing itself. Nor do I see any evidence of oil that may have leaked out along this base of the resin, perhaps from shipping. So I went ahead and further kind of inspected the table. And what I did was I got a little pen light, this little guy that I've got here, and kind of got right down in here and looked right into the well here where our bearing sits. And again, I did not see any sort of oil or evidence of any sort of lubrication in there, which is a real concern because that means this table may not have been oiled by the factory, and the average person probably wouldn't check a brand new turntable to make sure the bearing is oiled, and you could do damage to it. May explain also a little bit of a noise I was hearing on startup with this thing that would then kind of quiet down. So we're going to get some proper bearing oil. We're going to go through the steps of lubing the bearing, and then once we're done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to clean this pulley here as well too, because we've got a little residue from the rubber belt on that, and that certainly will affect the stability of the speed. It could cause the turntable to deviate a little bit. So we'll be right back to do that tomorrow. So we're going to use some light machine oil, and this would be typically used for sewing machines. Now I've heard a lot of conflicting kind of input on what type of oil to use. Some say that sewing machine oil is too light and that it will work its way out of the well, for lack of better words, and make a mess. I've heard others say it works just fine. We're going to go ahead. We've had good luck with it in the past. We're going to use it again. And all we need is 2 drops. That was 1, and that should be plenty. Now we've got 2.5, probably close to 3 drops actually in here. Try to get a half drop down the side of the well just to kind of lubricate it as this subplatter kind of drops into place. And this is kind of the extent of it. Just lower the subplatter as such, and it should slowly drop itself down. Sometimes you have to kind of rock these subplatters side to side for it to push the air out of the well and kind of seat in position. And this one has come down without a problem, so I think we're actually just fine where we are. Then we'll go ahead and put the belt back on it and the platter on top and give it a test. Now before we get the belt on, we're actually going to clean the pulley where the belt kind of rubs up against. There's a little bit of black residue on it, and that little bit of residue can actually affect the speed of the record player. Be proactive, give that a little bit of a clean. And we might put one drop of oil also right where the shaft is, where the pulley is. That would kind of eventually work its way down into the motor.
Yeah, that background noise, that is what we call the peanut gallery. Can't find a quiet place anywhere around here. Let's get back to it.
Now we're going to go ahead. We're going to put the platter back in position, just as such. And let this run for a little while just as it is.
Welcome back. Before we have some final kind of discussion around the subplatter and whether or not the subplatter made a difference, if it did make a difference, what exactly did it do or what did it not do? Whether or not you should consider a subplatter upgrade, we'll talk about that as well too. But before we do that, I want to talk about one other thing that I think is really quite important for really any vinyl enthusiast, whether you're a casual listener or you're really hardcore into vinyl, as I may be kind of borderline. You may have noticed in the earlier clip, I had a mat that I'd put on the platter. For those who recognized it, it was actually a leather mat. And that's what I've got right here. This is a project mat. They call it the Leather It. They say it's a high quality leather. And kind of the idea is that it should reduce static that builds up on the mat and on the record, which again could really hamper your listening, your enjoyment if you have lots of clicks and pops. And if you listen to vinyl and you do get lots of clicks and pops, it's probably got to do with static buildup as well as lint and stuff like that that gets on the record, that gets transferred from the mat to your record and your playback surface. So the idea is we reduce noise with this. You can put it on really any turntable. And you know, there's a big debate on the way platter mats can change the sound, because again, we're changing the surface that the record's sitting on. That, by the way, was my Techniques clock. Maybe I'll show you that later. It almost sounded like a timer. You know, some say that thick kind of mats can over dampen the playback surface. For example, this, which is another choice, which is a cork mat. I use cork from time to time. I've been pretty happy with cork and the playback results. This cork mat actually has some rubber in it, which to help provide even more dampening. And kind of the theory behind cork is that, you know, it should firm up the bottom end, so on and so forth, or, you know, kind of eliminates ringing and stuff like that. Maybe this will be a debate in an upcoming episode that we have, and I'd love to hear your comments, even pre, to that kind of video on what you use. Am I babbling? I don't know. Anyways, that's another choice. Now you could also use the felt. Now this is an upgraded felt mat. You can see it's kind of thicker. It's quite firm. It doesn't have as porous of a surface as what comes with the Project turntable and what you're going to find on the Regas. This one is not as bad for attracting dust because of the actual construction of this felt. It's more of like a synthetic than anything. and it's again thick, which would provide some sort of dampening. Now, I didn't want to use this, and I didn't want to use the rubber because they are so thick, and it changes the actual height of or the relation of the height between the playback surface, the top of the record, and your tone arm. And the thicker the mat that you put on, you may have to raise your actual arm, or the VTA as you call it, to compensate for that. And I didn't want to have to do that, so I was on a business trip, and I thought, why don't I grab one of these and see what it's like, because it's really as thin as the felt that's provided. Did I notice a difference? Well, there was less static. I can't really comment at this point because I didn't have a long enough experience with that mat, hence for a future discussion. Now let's talk about this platter, or Subplatter, because this sits below our platter. This is a really impressive piece to look at. It's machined out of a nice solid piece of aluminum, as you kind of see here. It looks really well constructed. It really does, and it will run you about $220, which, when you hold it in your hand, it actually seems fairly substantial and not that outrageous. The question is, does it work? Now, a couple comments to start. The spindle on this Subplatter fits into let's call it a hole that's in the plinth, which is the base of your turntable. The bearing's at the bottom of that hole. So this kind of sits in there and rests on top of the bearing. Pretend my finger's the bearing, and it spins. That's kind of how it works. Now, this dropped really quickly into that well where the bearing is. Again, a couple clips back, you'll notice when I insert this, it just dropped. Sometimes it can take up to 10, 15, 20, I've heard people say 45 minutes for their Subplatter to lower all the way, because usually the tolerances, the width of this kind of, what do you want to call it, spindle, let's say, to the hole in the well, very tight. It takes a long time typically to drop because you're displacing the air that's in there and any of the oil that you put in. In this case, it dropped really quickly, which would lead you to believe that either the extra weight of the Subplatter made it drop quickly because it's no longer a light resin, or the tolerances are not there, meaning it's a looser fit, making it easier to displace that air and that oil and to drop in place. And that to me was a little bit of a concern, because if it's a looser fit, then we could be getting a little bit of play ever so slightly, creating vibrations, increasing whoa and flutter, which defeats the whole point of the upgrade in the first place. So I reached out to the distributor for the product, a local dealer in Burlington, Ontario, and he said, geez, that sounds kind of interesting, and it makes sense. I asked him whether it should have a matching bearing and well manufactured to fit this. And he did ask Project, or the representative, who said it's not a problem. As long as you can't take that Subplatter and jiggle it side to side, you're okay. Now, if it was jiggling side to side, you've got a real problem. In my opinion, though, even if there's a slight amount of play, again, that's why we're installing this, is to reduce those subtle vibrations. It seems kind of defeating in purpose. So anyways, we're not quite sure on that piece there, but that's something that you might want to consider if you're doing the upgrade, or look out for. Now, I know there's other brands who make the Subplatters that actually sell them complete with a matching bearing and well set. Now let's talk about some final opinions on the sound.
So the first thing that we did is we ran a couple speed checks with an app called RPM, which you can download to your iPhone or Android device. Now, unfortunately, I did not see any sort of noticeable improvement with speed control or whoa and flutter. Now, this is not to say that it does not exist, but we may be limited by the precision of the app itself. So now let's talk about how it sounds.
So, how about how it sounds? I would love to tell you that I was blown away, that there was an instant noticeable difference between the original Subplatter and the upgraded aluminum one. But that wasn't the case. I'd like to say that there was some added definition in the bottom end, that the bass seemed a little more full and that playback just was that little bit, I don't know, more clear. And it may have been ever so slightly, but just not enough for me to be able to say that that upgrade was worth the $220. I think you're better off personally taking that money and investing in a better cartridge. For example, the Ortophon Blue. That would be an upgrade from the Picket Pro, in my opinion. So I guess what it comes down to is what you're chasing after. If it's to buy a Debut Pro and then to upgrade and tweak it, I think you're just probably better off using that upgrade money towards a better project turntable. I think the Debut Pro is just good as it is for what it is. So for those reasons, again, I really don't recommend the upgrade. I just don't think it's worth it in this instance. Now, if you've done the upgrade yourself, I'd love to hear what your opinions are of it, but I just wasn't feeling it. Next week, we're going to take a peek at, since we're on the turntable roll, a really cool turntable. We'll put it up here where the monkey is, and I think you're going to love it. So until that time, thanks for joining us on the Vintage Vibe, and be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.